We'll just start as we do, just by settling the mind for a moment. So we just sit comfortably with an upright spine and our feet are flat, just kind of sitting in a stable, comfortable position. Eyes are gently closed or very slightly open. And just take a moment to settle the mind by watching the breath. So we try to lose interest in the room. We lose interest in thinking about the past or the plans that we have for the future. Just trying to hold the mind in the present moment. And we can use the physical sensation that accompanies the in-breath and the out-breath to help us to do that. So just breathing naturally and normally, try to hold the mind on that sensation, noticing and letting go when the mind becomes distracted, when anything that isn't that sensation arises. Noticing it quickly and lifting your attention from that distraction and gently placing it back on that present moment physical sensation, trying to hold it there for longer periods. Then on your own, set an altruistic motivation for your time. Thinking of your goals, your interests in your spiritual life, and thinking of how meeting those goals benefits not only yourself, but with those skills and abilities you benefit others. When we develop our own good qualities, then everyone that we come into contact with is also benefited. I think that's the real purpose of our time, to learn how to be of greater and greater benefit to other sentient beings. All right. Welcome back. Good afternoon, Mary. So, we left off the last class in the chapter on the good heart. And so we were talking in that chapter. That was really where, for the first time, we introduced the idea of the self-cherishing mind in a way, and how, although in English, that sounds like something that we want to pursue, it's really a translation of, a Sanskrit term, but the essence of it is not self-care, but the interest is that we are having an egoistic self-preoccupation. So it isn't that the self-cherishing mind isn't really the mind that is going to bring about the results that ultimately we are seeking, but rather it is an egoistic self-preoccupation that really is going to get us into trouble. It is the lens of the ego through which we filter our experiences. And when we filter our experiences in that way, really only trying to please the ego, then everything that we do ultimately ends up going wrong. And ultimately, our own needs, we think the problem, the real problem is that Buddhism points out is that we think that is the method for gaining more and more happiness, looking out for the ego. And one of the real fundamental insights in the book and in the philosophy in general is that when we say that we want to be happy, it's this mind of exaggerated egoistic self-concern that we have to work with in order to get that result, in order to actually achieve what we want for ourselves. That's the chapter that we ended on. Did anyone who was here have a question, or from the videos or anything of that sort, before we move on? We're still a little bit in this chapter, but all right.
I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Just to clarify this, so I know we shouldn't self-cherish our ego much, but then I get confused with this because I've also heard that we have to self-care maybe more so that we can be more available to others. So we have to worry about ourselves to be available to take care of others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what I would say is that when we're talking about self-cherishing, we're talking about an exaggerated level of self-concern. There's certainly a realistic, reasonable level of self-concern. And that is something that we do have to pay attention to and make sure that we're not neglecting, because if we just try to do too much, more than we're presently capable of handling, then we won't be successful long term. We might be successful for a while. So certainly we do have to balance having, being in touch with how much can I realistically do today, this week, this month, versus what is it that is restorative, and but also I think what Lama Zopa, maybe not so much in this book, but in general, what he points out and what other great masters point out is that ultimately, really, that there are ways of familiarizing the mind such that working, engaging in actions, we don't see them as something that tires us. We don't, that there's that the sort of the stress, a lot of times we get tired out. We feel like there's only so much in the tank, right? And that I've expended all of this and now it's time to kind of shut off or go, watch a movie or make a phone call or, to do something to do something else because I've given all of this energy and all of this is so that's it isn't to say that that's not our experience. That is our experience. And we can when we need to work within that experience, we should do that. I do think that we could keep an eye on the idea that it's also true that if that it's a difficult point and it's hard, it's kind of, as you're saying, it's a subtle issue that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. But I think what Lama Zopa is also saying is that this idea of the ego goes to extremely subtle levels. And we feel almost like when we're engaging in things that are kind of mundane or repetitive or that aren't in keeping with the hobbies that we have or the things that we gravitate toward, um, if the purpose of that is to bring some benefit for others, there are ways of continually reminding ourselves and thinking of that this isn't really a mundane kind of boring thing that I have to do, that there's a purpose. The purpose behind this is serving my goal of being of benefit to others. And if that's the real purpose of my life, then there's no stress to that action. It's not an action that we feel depleted by. It's an action that we feel continually refreshed by. I think that takes time. I think that is something that we can start to be thinking about. But it is true that if we haven't gotten to that place yet, then we do need to take care of the mind also and think of, that maybe I do need to go out to be in nature for a while, or I do need to, do something that I find, or some exercising or, these things that are kind of stress relieving. We do need to do those, but also turning toward, I think in a way, what helps us to get from where we are to that, where I was saying these great masters might suggest we can get to, is also to turn toward practice, to turn toward when we're looking for something that is restorative, to start thinking about new, not falling into older habits and older patterns of how we've identified that before, which is maybe, but as I was saying, a movie or something that might not be as useful, something that we might need to do a restorative activity, to get away from the computer, to get away from, but to think about, could that be just a 10-minute breathing meditation? Could that be a 10-minute meta meditation? And would that serve the same purpose of feeling stress relieving, feeling restorative? So, but you're right that if we try to just go, push all the time, that is not a sustainable method for us. But so again, I think that's all I can say on the topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Grandpa.
Mhm. So again, this is just kind of summing up where we are with this topic, to try to remember that the real purpose of our life is to try to use every day to find methods, to find ways of living that life for others. And that when we do that, our whole life becomes beneficial. That if we only live our life in service to what we enjoy, what's pleasurable, then that's a very limited goal. And the result will also, therefore, be very limited. But when we can try to keep coming back to a wider intention. So we talked last week, about, that Lama Zopa has the method to transform a suffering life into happiness, and maybe looking at that practice in the morning, or finding something in the morning that can set our intention for the day. If it's not that, making up our own verses, making up our own, whatever it might be, and then coming back to that throughout the day. But his next chapter is called Enlightenment, which is getting at this wider perspective and this greater, again, coming back to a greater purpose for our lives. So when we think about, so this is really getting at, I think this whole course is getting at changing in various ways our definition of happiness, and then therefore the definition of the methods that we use to bring about that happiness. He says that right now, with this very mind and in this very moment, we all have the potential for temporary and ultimate happiness, even the peerless happiness of full enlightenment. So this is, again, kind of asking us the question, have we been settling, if we look at the earlier chapters, earlier material, are we getting caught up on small happinesses? Are we getting caught up on these temporary sensorial kinds of happinesses? And by getting caught up in that process, do we lack the spaciousness in the mind to have a wider definition? And then a wider definition will require deeper methods. They'll require, if our definition of happiness is just having the food that I like, having the drinks that I like, having the right temperature, we can kind of do those things to some degree, not all of the time. Not, the pandemic certainly demonstrated to us that sometimes even that is outside of our reach, because the things that we wanted to do, the people that we wanted to be around, we were deprived. So even that level of happiness is, we might be blessed to have a great degree of control over that compared to billions of other people, but even that level is not fully within our control. But if we only live on that level, then this deeper level might always be out of reach, might never be possible, because we're caught up in that lesser level of happiness. But also, it's incredibly important to think about what he's saying here. Do we believe in this very mind and in this very moment that I myself have that potential? Or do we think, well, I had to have been born, in Tibet and have achieved, have become a monk at age 6? And, are we kind of saying that, not taking responsibility really for our own happiness by putting it off and saying, well, I don't have the right conditions, or I wasn't born in the right conditions? He's saying that we ourselves in this very moment can use this life for that incredible purpose. But if we don't start by really believing that he's telling us the truth, then we won't put effort into that. That's really important. Not that we need to just accept that that's true, but that we should start investigating seriously and come to a conclusion in our own, using reasoning, using logic, using the teachings that are available to decide, am I really going to investigate this question and come to a clear understanding in my own mind? Because that, if we never come to a clear understanding, then we'll always be blocked from putting in the time and the effort. I think that's, kind of what the implication of that. Deborah, did you have a question?
No, not really. I guess, so whatever we read, we just don't believe it. We have to do our own research.
Buddhism certainly suggests that ultimately we want to be able to use our own direct experience to validate the teachings. So, of course, there are some things that we can't validate right now, but Buddhism does say that there's no such thing as an unknowable mystery. Buddhism rejects the idea of an unknowable mystery, but it is true that wanting to know something, like I might want to know the physics that underlie quantum mechanics, but I can't just know that tomorrow because I decide that I would like to. I do have to become someone who, through time and through effort, and eventually I can know that. And Buddhism says that everything in the Buddhist path is like that, that it isn't sufficient to just want to know something. And so for a time, we might need to rely on the scriptures, on the teachings, but that we can become someone who can validate them directly. And as we go along, we should be trying to ask the question, does this seem true in my own direct experience? If not, why not? And what do I need to help me to clarify this? What would help me clarify this? And then to really try to pursue that. So always trying to approach it from that open-ended perspective, but realizing at the same time that some things they might depend upon developing single-pointed concentration. They might depend on doing things that I've not yet done. But that Buddhism would say that I can do them.
Okay. So you do believe, because you go with faith into it and you believe what you read, but then, like you say, there comes a point where you have to put it into practice, and it's in the practice where you sort of investigate.
Right. If we have confidence that the Buddha is a valid teacher, then we start from, using his teachings. Venerable Verbena always says, to look at the teachings as our hypothesis, to take, that we have confidence that that the Buddha is telling us the truth. But that's still a very shaky ground. If we never go further than that, then someone might always be able to argue against us and to say that we're wrong. And so we do still need to try to, in our own direct experience, see the validity of what is being presented.
Thank you.
So this is a little bit smaller font. I'm sorry about that. But this is just, getting at, if you go full screen, maybe it might help. This is also getting at another really important point, that just like what he was saying before, that with this body and this mind, we can achieve everything that we are seeking, even up to full enlightenment. What he's demonstrating here is that, and this is something that we'll expound upon more in today's class, that all of the parts of our own mind that we think of as being problematic, they are not problematic or unique to just people like me, and that there's some sort of special kind of person who is able to achieve enlightenment. This is kind of helping us again to see that it's true that I do have ignorance, anger, all of these things. But as long as I'm willing to recognize that, and as long as I'm willing to confront and try to put effort into overcoming that, then I will get the same results that the Buddha got. And that if I can take that to be the real purpose of my life, that I can say that the real purpose of why I am alive doesn't come from a creator or someone, but I choose for myself that the real purpose is to overcome these problematic aspects of my mind, and that by doing that, I will achieve the same result that has been achieved by all of the Buddhas of the past, and is the method that all of the Buddhas of the future will become the Buddhas of the future. So the next chapter is called Self-Cherishing and Cherishing Others. So that was what he had to say about enlightenment. And now really he's going to go into more detail about this idea that we've introduced of self-cherishing and cherishing others. So this is another one of, as I said, the purpose of this course is to try to find tools and techniques that we start using in daily life. And I think that this is something that we can start to implement when we say that when we label something as a problem, when we are going through our day and we're starting to feel like, oh, this is a real, and because that label is coming from our own mind, that this is something that is causing stress, it's causing anxiety, it's causing me to feel overworked, stressed out. He's saying here, check really whether that label has anything to do with our selfish mind. And so, of course, he's using very direct language here. He's, telling it, giving it to us straight here. He's saying that the problem that this label of problem is directly related to the view that we're taking in the mind, with it, there's something else that I would rather be doing, that there's something more comfortable, something, my preference would be right now to be, watching a movie or eating something different. And I'm not doing that. And therefore, this is a problem. That what my ego wants is to be on the beach or, whatever it might be. And that isn't my present moment experience. Therefore, my present moment experience is a problem. And this is, again, getting back to what I was mentioning earlier, that this self-cherishing mind is incredibly ingrained in our minds. And if we can think that whatever it is that I'm doing now, its purpose, that it isn't what it looks like. It isn't, that it is an action that that is actualizing my intention to be of benefit to others. So whether it's talking on the phone at work or driving to work, or that it isn't the surface level action doesn't matter. It's not what we normally kind of think, writing an email or, that action isn't that action by itself, that action is only something that is helping me to manifest or to actualize my deeper intention of being of benefit to sentient beings. And when we can do that, whatever's happening isn't something that we're going to label as a problem. We might, that isn't to say that things will go the way that we wanted them to go. That isn't to say that things will unfold in the way that we had hoped or the way that we had planned. Things might be, there's so many things that are outside of our control and that depend upon so many external causes and conditions that our plans and our expectations and the way that we wanted things to be might be different than the way that they actually unfold. But what will cause us to suffer is clinging to that expectation that this needs to unfold in the way that I had hoped. If we can only keep coming back to, this is something that I'm trying to do for the benefit of others, and there's only so much of this that, I can directly be responsible for, and, I'm driving to work for the benefit of all sentient beings, and there's traffic, and so yes, I might be late to work, but I don't control the traffic, and so being stressed out and anxious as I'm trying to drive to work to be of benefit to all sentient beings is pointless. And then we think, when I'm in traffic for the benefit of all sentient beings, everyone that I'm in traffic with is one of those sentient beings that I'm trying to benefit. It's not that, well, when I get to work, that's when that starts. I'm also in traffic to be of benefit to all sentient beings. So the person who's cutting me off, the person who's driving too slow, the person who's honking it behind me, I'm also trying to work for their benefit. So that is really the medicine that, if we keep coming back to, will prevent us from being stressed out, from being anxious, from being, from feeling overwhelmed. It's not easy, no one's saying that that's something that we can just spontaneously move into, but if we feel that there is anxiety, if we feel that there is stress, what Lama Zopa is saying is that it's because at a very, very deep level, we're so habituated to the outward activity being something that, wanting that outward activity to be something that we've already decided is an outward activity that meshes with our preferences. And if we stick with that, we'll be limited in how our day goes. We'll be giving up control over all of our experiences. But if instead of this outward activity has to be on this list of things that I already enjoy doing, instead of thinking that's what happiness is, it's possible to think it doesn't really matter what list this outward activity is on. What matters is my reason for engaging in this activity. And if I can hold my mind in that aspiration, then that aspiration will be the medicine that cuts off the stressful suffering that would otherwise arise simply because this is an activity that I don't find on my checklist of things I would like to be doing right now. Because there's a lot of things that are on that checklist. There's a lot of things that aren't that we have to do. There's a lot of tasks day after day after day that are not being at the beach, that aren't having our favorite foods. And if we never find a method of transforming those into the path, then we'll be meeting with problems again and again and again. Yes.
Just a question. So I understand what you've said, and so it's kind of thinking wherever we are in life is learn to have acceptance of it and realize that we're here for that. We're here because we're supposed to be, and whatever we do to do it with joy and all that, because it's for others. But what happens with let's say the thoughts and emotions, like you don't create that. Say you have a thought because somebody, some outer source created it, and so that thought creates an emotion in you. So in that situation, do you think, like you were just talking about, about life, do you see it, well, do I just become aware of it and accept it, and because I'm trying to be better for other sentient beings?
Do you have a specific example that you were thinking of, or that where that happened that we could use to problem solve?
Yeah, like for example, say you're walking down the street and somebody says, you say something in a kind way, but somebody responds to you in a very hurtful way. And because you don't know that person, you kind of freeze, and you don't want to make things worse. But then you stay with that emotion, like you carry it, but due to some outer source that you didn't create, so do you, clear that by going to the person and saying, hey, it wasn't right what you said, or whatever, or do you carry it and ignore it to not make things worse for the others? But then you have it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
So I think so. Last week, there was that chapter on what he was saying, compassion for what he was calling the enemy, compassion for the difficult person. So I think one really important insight, and again, this is something that, Venerable Rabina has said, time and again, is that we have to also recognize that our emotions stem from our thoughts. And that, in the Western kind of way of thinking, there is kind of a disconnect between those two things. And we kind of think that emotions are things that happen to us, or that, but really they do stem from the thoughts that we have going into our experiences. And so with regard to challenging, interactions, the idea would be that it's possible not to experience that as a suffering experience when we go into that with the right kind of perspective. It's going into that with the expectation that when I show kindness to someone else, they must show kindness back to me. That is the framework that we go into, which, that's kind of how that's not completely unrealistic, in a way. We're certainly raised to, we're our parents told us the importance of, being polite, and we try to be polite. And so we have culturally, it's something that is valued generally, and we value it. So there is a general kind of cultural expectation that this is going to go in a particular, that this is going to go one way. because often it does. Most of the time, when we say something politely, kindness is reciprocated. We've learned that. But it isn't what's unreasonable is to think that every single time I speak to any other sentient being for the rest of my life, they will 100% of the time reciprocate that with polite, kind, they could be, they might not have heard us, they might be distracted. They might have just gotten really bad news. They might be dealing with some really stressful, heavy problem with a loved one, or there's all kinds of, and we ourselves, sometimes we catch ourselves not having responded because we were, and we think, oh, I hope that they didn't think I was rude because I didn't smile when and we catch ourselves 5 minutes later, because we didn't respond in the way that we had hoped that we would respond. So and even if someone is kind of responding in a way that is pretty clearly disrespectful, or even maybe we really feel like there's some ill will behind what they're saying, one thing that we can try to do is to distinguish their actions from like we were saying before, try to distinguish their unskillful actions from their true essence, and thinking that they are under the influence in that moment, they were strongly under the influence of ill will. And I sometimes am also strongly under the influence of ill will. And it's causing a problem for me in my life. And so it's causing a problem for them in their life. And so trying to think that it's the arising of ill will that is the problem, and that they are simply like me in that they haven't completely figured out how to eradicate ill will from their life. Just like me, I also haven't figured out how to eradicate ill will. Maybe what triggered their ill will isn't what triggers it for me, but sometimes I'm also triggered in that way because I'm ordinary and they're ordinary. So it's trying to see them as a suffering sentient being that I have compassion for. And when we do that, we're not stuck with ruminating on they shouldn't have done that. I wish they, how dare they do that? We're not stuck with carrying it the rest of the day because we didn't have the expectation going into the experience. And again, not easy. No one's saying that we can start to do that tomorrow, but we can do it. We can do it more and more effectively when we put more and more effort into trying to think in new ways and using sessions of meditation to imagine having gone into it like that. When we don't respond that way, when we do carry it the rest of the day, we do a session of meditation where we think, had I gone into that without that unrealistic expectation, how would my day have been different? If I had seen that, if I had thought about the kindness that that person has shown me in past lives going into that experience, how would that have changed the way in which I responded? So there's all kinds of, but then, it's a long process too, of course.
Yeah, well, that's been very helpful, I guess, to think when something like that might affect you is to question and say, well, I don't know what's going on in that person's life, and shift, yeah. So thank you. Yes.
Now, I am going to go to the dog park. I'll be leaving about 5:15, 5:30. I hope you go.
Okay, so here he's just kind of, saying, again, reiterating that, again, this idea that we think that success and our wishes, that real success and that our wishes are fulfilled by only looking out for what pleases the ego. And here he's again reiterating that the more that we can learn to cherish others, that's when our own success will start. And that's when our own wishes will really be fulfilled. Again, that's just sort of reiterating what has been said. And here he makes a subtler and more difficult point. And this may be the last thing that we have time to cover, but we'll see. Here he's giving us a way of thinking about this idea of self-cherishing in a subtler, more philosophical way, by asking us to think about how is it that ego appears to us. The reason that we do go through our lives being principally interested in engaging in the things that we naturally gravitate toward, that we naturally enjoy, and the reason that things that aren't on that list can cause us some stress, cause us to feel burned out. Here he's saying that there's some projection that is happening with respect to how we think of ourselves, and that projection is not supported by, you could say, even just reality itself. He says that the real self exists nowhere, neither inside your body nor outside your body, neither within your mind nor without your mind. So what empowers, what underlies, it's true, that we've gone through life with this perspective that the things that happen to me are the most important things. The things that I enjoy are the most important things. The things that I find unpleasant are the things that I need to immediately get rid of. I have no tolerance for the things that I don't enjoy being part of my experience. And I only want to be in contact with engaging with the things that I do enjoy. So we put ourselves at the center. And this is, there's nothing, there's nothing abnormal about that, in the sense that that doesn't make us a bad person. That isn't like there's good people and there's bad people, and every ordinary person is this way from the moment of our birth up until now. And Buddhism would suggest over countless previous incarnations, that perspective has been predominating. And it's just sort of a consequence of being ordinary. It isn't some kind of moralistic judgment. It's just a consequence of being normal, being ordinary, that is how we go through our lives. But there's a deeper and more subtle reason that is the reason that we go through our lives in that way. And that is because when we apprehend ourselves, when we think about ourselves, the appearance of the I, of the self, naturally takes on a kind of solidity. We never really question the thoughts that we have. We never really question our desires, our impulses, our views, because they have a kind of concreteness, a kind of solidity. We feel almost as though there is an I that exists in a superposition above both the body and the mind. That the body and the mind are servants to this solid thing that controls the body and the mind. And that everything that we think and everything that we want and don't want is attached to this real, concrete, independent identity that is fixed and solid. And that is a very narrow perspective. And here he's saying, if we can try to remember that although it's true that we exist, although it's true that there is a body and that there is a mind, if we can try to have more spaciousness around that, then we will be able to reduce the impulse of putting ourselves and only ourselves at the center of everything that we're thinking and doing. And if we can try to recognize that my mind and my body are a collection of parts and they've come together in this life, but that really is how I exist. I exist as both a body and a mind that have come together, but in previous lives, the body and the minds, it's been the same mind, but the forms have been different. In future lives, it'll be the same mind, but the forms will be different. And even over the course of this life, the mind itself has changed. And so that process of change is beginningless and endless. So when we start to try to think about things in that way, everything becomes a bit softer in how we can hold our identity. It's not quite so fixed. It's not quite so concrete. And so then we can kind of question, well, what does it mean to say, I like chocolate cake? What does that, we can just kind of, what does that really mean to say, I enjoy, who is it that likes chocolate cake? What is it that really likes chocolate cake? What is the nature of that identity? And if it's not as solid, we can say that that it is my experience that I prefer certain things and I don't prefer certain things. But when we start to just investigate and question and interrogate what is the nature of the identity that these preferences are stemming from, if we can see that it is not as solid as it appears, then that will really start to undermine the impulse that we have to only care about the things that happen to me, and to undermine the importance that we place on the things that happen to me need to come from the list of things I do enjoy, and they should never come from the list of things I don't enjoy. Yeah. Yep. Any thoughts? So of course, and that's something that we'll come back to a bit next week. It is getting at, indirectly, it is getting at, in Buddhist philosophy, really the most subtle and the most difficult point that exists in Buddhist philosophy, in a kind of a little bit more gentle way. But so trying to realize this idea is extremely difficult. And it's not something that we should expect will happen soon. But what he's saying here is, whenever a self-cherishing thought arises, please remember this. He's saying, when we find ourselves caught by a strong urge, then to try to take a moment and to reflect on, where is it coming from? Where I feel like there is something, it's my direct experience that I really, really exist in a way that is beyond the body and the mind. But is that true? And is that a projection? Is that a concretization of what is true? It is true that we do exist, but how do we exist? Is it true that appearance is really valid? And can we undermine that appearance by searching? He says here that this exists neither inside the body nor outside the body, neither within the mind nor without the mind. So what if I did exist in that way? What would that mean? Would that mean that I could have or be able to do things that depend on neither the body nor the mind? Because if it's how I feel in my own direct experience, is that there's something that controls the body and the mind, which means it can't depend on either the body or the mind. If it really does control the body and the mind, then it must be like, then the body and the mind must be like the marionette that's controlled by this thing that's completely isolated, completely separate. But if that is true, then I must be able to think thoughts that don't depend upon my mind. I must be able to engage in physical actions that don't depend upon my body. I must have some agency that's outside the body and the mind. But when we search, what we find is that it's, as Venerable Robina says, it's unnecessary, that postulating that level of concreteness is ultimately unnecessary, because the body and the mind actually explain everything that we can do. They actually explain the coming together of all of the parts of the body and all of the parts of the mind, actually describe what's true about us. And the appearance of this separate self is a projection that's just labeled on top of that. And that projection isn't doing anything except concretizing what's there, layering on top a solidifying or a concretizing of what's there. So we're not trying to do something mystical. We're just trying to get in touch with what's there without the concretizing, without the reifying of what's there. Extremely, incredibly difficult to do, but Lama Zopa is suggesting that every time, that just by interrogating the self-cherishing thought, trying to find its source, we can try to demonstrate that to ourselves. Any questions? I always feel silly asking for questions after that kind of topic, but because it's such a, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have one that just come to my mind, and it might be a really silly question, but does this have anything to do with humbling, learning to be humble?
I think that certainly, I think a side effect is because the opposite of humble is arrogant, right? So, and I think arrogance is certainly a consequence of this kind of concretization. So, I think that a person does become more humble, the more that they can soften the way that they hold themselves. But it's not directly related to thinking about like all of the things that we don't know or all of the things that we can't do. That's a more direct antidote to let's say pridefulness. In Buddhism, when we talk about trying to overcome pridefulness, we might try to recollect all of the things that we don't know or can't do, which does lead to a sense of humility, and does overcome arrogance. This is another, it's also, but what Buddhism would say is that all of the afflictive emotions are also undercut when we soften the way that we hold ourselves. So it's not necessarily a direct antidote in the same way that is presented as a direct antidote, but it does have the same consequence because this antidote works with all of the delusions equally. But it's really about trying to just question and interrogate how the I appears in our own direct experience. We are out of time, unfortunately, but we've got 2 more classes, so we'll meet up again next week.
Thank you very much.
So just briefly, we'll dedicate. So we'll recollect our virtuous motivation and then think that I've created positive energy by contemplating in these constructive ways, and may that positive energy serve as a principal cause and condition for my achieving of the state of enlightenment, so that I may perfectly benefit all sentient beings without exception, and may it ripen in whatever way sentient beings need to provide all temporary and ultimate happiness and peace and freedom from suffering. And by practicing in this way, may any hindrances to the long lives of my gurus be completely dispelled. All right. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.